Hey there, good morning. It's Sunday morning. So I am making another one. I have gone a bit further with the speaker thing. Yeah, I came out here to clean up and I made that video and then I went in and edited it. And then I was thinking about things, in particular about getting the magnet out and how much trouble that was going to be. So I decided to come back out. And instead of cleaning up the shop like I was supposed to do, I took the magnet out of the speaker. And that went fairly well. The first thing I did was I cut out the spider, and then that, takes out the voice coil along with it. And that exposed the inside of the frame, which as it turns out was screwed down to the plate, this one right here. And all I needed to do was unscrew that, and that came off. And that left me with the magnet assembly, which was this piece right here, attached to one side of the magnet and the pole piece attached to the other side. I used heat to soften the glue. I've done this in the past with good success. One thing is you have to be careful about not overheating the magnet because then it'll lose magnetism. Except, these particular types here, it's fairly high. You have to get it really hot. So I started with the heat gun, and that, got one side no problem. But then when I went to do the other side, I had to break out the torch and give it a bit more heat. It was, the heat gun simply wasn't getting it hot enough, mainly because of this big hunk of metal here in the middle. And as it turns out, this stuff is cast iron. So after I got it all apart, I went back in and I did some research, a little bit of research, and apparently cast iron is better for concentrating the flux, or actually what's happening here. I'm trying to get this out and I keep tripping over the words. What's happening here is this is a magnet with poles, of course, the north and the south. That's the way this is oriented. Okay? So on the north side, we'll say this is the north. That's where this one was, and that would give me the north side on this ring inside here. Now to bring the south side up to the top, this thing goes inside and this sticks up through the middle. So that brings the south pole up to the top. So what you're left with is a gap in here that has north pole on one side, south pole on the other. And the other thing about using iron rather than steel is that it's cheaper if you have access to the material. Like if you're making 1,000 speakers, it's cheaper to get this part made from cast than it is to get it made from steel. Okay, so as for, as far as I can find in the things that I did research, I didn't go too deep, okay? I don't have the time to become an expert on magnetism. As far as I can tell, there's a difference, but it's not significant enough that you would have to go out and get cast iron instead. So I'm going to be using steel for the most part. I went out okay, I didn't stop there. Next morning, I was kind of hot for it again. So I went out to the shed and I found that pipe, the 8-inch pipe that I thought was steel, but as it turns out, it's cast iron, or it's iron. I realized that when I started cutting it, because it's cutting like iron, and the sparks that are coming off look like iron. And then when I tried to break a piece of it, bend a piece of it, actually, it broke, and that confirmed it. It's iron. So what I did was I cut a ring, and that is exactly the same. It's actually a couple thousandths bigger or wider than this, okay? And that's this thing right here. And I cut that freehand with the grinder after laying it out with paper, and did the other side with the calipers, drew it out, and then I could hardly see that line, so I added a strip of tape right on the edge to make it more accurate. And then I used sandpaper that was double-sided taped down to a flat piece of steel out on my workbench, and I stroked it back and forth to make it as smooth as possible. You know, you want to get this stuff very close. It's no good if it's really rough. But then it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect either. Like the magnetism will travel through this regardless of how, like it's better if it's a nice tight fit, okay? Anyway, so I didn't stop there. I thought that the gap around the outside of the magnet was too large between the inside of that, like the outside of that and the inside of this ring. So what I did was I cut another ring from the pipe, and that's where I broke it. I tried to bend it, thinking that maybe I could bend it to fit inside, right? You cut a segment out and you try to, but it broke. And so what I did instead was I cut it into pieces, these segments here, and I straightened up the ends on each and carefully fitted them in. And I don't have any gaps anywhere. Not that any gaps, like small gaps would be a big deal, I don't think. And then I glued them in and I left it to dry overnight. So I have this, which is iron, and I cut the end plate, which is steel, except I want to double this up. And the idea is to make a couple more rings for the top that will provide the gap. However, I'm a little bit concerned about the size of the gap that I have. I'm going to take the magnet and try to get it centered on this plate, and it's kind of difficult because, man, this has got a lot of power and it really wants to stick. It's not like neodymium power, but it doesn't want to move after you put it on. Right, so I'll try to get that. Now it's stuck to that. Man, it's stuck to that. Wow. And then I'll try to get it centered. I'm sorry you can't see, but you'll see shortly, okay? I'm just gonna tap it over. And then I'll get the ring. And this is going to be tricky too. I don't want to get my fingers pinched here. Really what I need to do is get some spacers. And I will when I actually build this properly. But here's the assembly. You see? Okay, and there's the gap. And I'm thinking maybe, possibly that's too small. Like, it's not too small, really, but I was thinking that I would have more gap. And I would have had more gap if I hadn't put in those segments, but then I also wouldn't have as much transfer of the magnetism of the, say, the South Pole up to the top. So, like I say, I got to make another plate that fits on top of this one that's exactly the same size as this one, and then I got to make a ring that fits on top of this one, okay, with the gap, a 1/8 inch gap in between. Right now I have a 3/16 of an inch gap, so it's close. Maybe it's too close, maybe that's not ideal in that arrangement right there, or maybe possibly, because I don't know, because I'm not an expert, right? Maybe this is really good. Like if any of you guys are magnetic experts, okay, genuine magnetos, tell me how this is, okay? Like my research, because you know, you gotta dig and dig and dig and dig, and I simply don't have the time to dig and dig and dig. All right, but what I could find is people saying, well, one source saying, that steel is really good for this. Low carbon steel. And that's what this is. This steel plate here. Okay? It's just regular mild steel. So not a huge amount of carbon in there. And then of course this ring, like I said, is iron. So that's as far as I've got. Alright? Now, am I gonna stop here for a while? Maybe. I think what I would like to do before I stop is because it's very difficult, I'm actually going to have to cut it out with the jigsaw, that ring for the top, okay? That fairly thin ring. And I'm also wondering if I should make that ring bigger, if that would like wider, actually wider than this thing. So rather than having the 1/2 inch that's here, make it like 1 inch, okay? Would that make a difference? Or would that mess things up? I don't know. That's the thing. I'm not a magnet expert. So if there's anyone out there watching this that is, or has a better understanding than I do, feel free to let me know, okay? So yeah, that with the magnet assembly finished, then it would be like the next step would be to make the voice coil and get that wound. And then from there, I would go to making the cone, but I also might make at the same time the spider and the surround. I've decided not to use the inner tube. It's just like the problem with the inner tube is the Schrader valve that's on there and the deformation around it. And like if I cut that section of the tube out, I'd have to join it back together. And maybe, I'm just thinking that I would be better off to make an accordion fold surround. Like I could get a piece of MDF and route out grooves with my router and a circle jig, and take cloth and soak it in some kind of resin, flexible resin, and put it in there, and that will give me my surround. I'll make it, I don't know, 1.5 inches wide. And then in the center of that, I could do the spider as well. So the same form for the whole thing. So it wouldn't be truly that big of a waste. But then I've got pieces of MDF big enough for that, like 30 inches by 30 inches. So yeah, so that's where we're at with big speaker build.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turned blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.